Several years ago, my wife and I, my family and I, were flying back from the United Kingdom back home. After we'd visited some family and friends there, we were flying back home. Well, our flight home had a connection in Orlando. Now, personally, I believe connecting flights are of the devil. I'm just put it out there. Some of my worst experiences traveling have taken place in connecting airports. But we got a great deal, so we had a connection through Orlando on the way. Well, this trip, this connecting flight was like so many others that I've had. Our flight from London left late, to the point where we were, for that entire 8-hour flight across the Atlantic Ocean, we were worried we're never going to make our connecting flight in Orlando. So we told the flight attendants, look, we have a connecting flight leaving Orlando to Atlanta, and based on our estimated time of arrival on this little flight tracker, I don't think we're ever going to make it. So the flight attendant told us, she said, hey, here's what we'll do. Minutes before we land, I'll move your family to the front of the plane. And I'm saying, well, it'd be okay for us if you did that now, but she didn't want that. Oh, we'll move you to the front of the plane, and you can be the first ones off the plane, help you make your flight. I said, great. So a few minutes before they started their descent, they moved us up to the front of the plane, and as soon as we pulled up to the gate and that door opened, the Jackson 4 bolted out that door, down the gangway. We raced out into the terminal there in the Atlanta airport, and we were met there by a lady in a uniform. And this lady, never seen her before in my life, she said, are you the Jacksons? And I said, yes, we're the Jacksons. She said, follow me. I know you have a connection, follow me. Okay, this lady knew Orlando Airport. She took us places, she took us shortcuts. We had no idea we're there. When we got to a place with a long line, she had the authority, apparently. She had the authority. She took us right to the front of the line. We were like this, excuse us. Took us to the front of the line. She talked to the people, processing us through the airport for us. Make a long story short, she got us to our gate of departure in the nick of time for our flight. Now, here's what I want you to see in this. We were able to successfully navigate that airport, not because of what we knew, not because of what we were able to do, but because of who we were with. We were with someone with the knowledge and authority necessary to help us navigate something unfamiliar to us. Okay, when it comes to navigating life well, it is not about what you know, and it's not about what you're able to do. It's about who you're with. We all have a decision to make when it comes to how we're going to live life. We can try to figure it out ourselves, do it our way, or we can do it with God. We can do life with God and do life His way. And what we're seeing as we study the life of Abraham during this series, what we're finding is doing life with God, His ways, make all the difference. If you have your Bibles, turn to one of the highlights of the entire Old Testament, Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 15. And here's what I want to share with you right out of the chute this morning. I want to give you the main idea of Genesis chapter 15 in a single statement. Here it is. All of us, we can know God by faith. Now, I'm not saying in that statement you can know about God. I'm not saying that. This is different. You can know God. You can have a relationship with Him through faith. Faith is the key to being able to do life with God and according to his ways. James, the half-brother of Jesus, when he's writing his book in the New Testament, was reflecting on the life of this great man, Abraham. And I want you to listen to what James, the half-brother of Jesus, had to say about Abraham. He said this: Abraham believed God. He had faith in him. And it was credited to him as righteousness. And he was called God's friend. Abraham was successful, navigated life well, because he was God's friend. He had a relationship with his Creator. He did life with God. And here's what I want you to hear me say. The message of the gospel is that you and I can be God's friend. We can do life with God. When we last left Abraham last Sunday, those of you who were here will remember, Abraham had just completed successfully a daring rescue mission. He had successfully rescued some hostages who had been taken by invading armies. He had not only rescued the hostages so that they could go back home, but he also recovered many of the items that these invading armies had stolen from kingdoms in the area near where Abraham lived. Okay, that's what has just happened when this amazing chapter, Genesis chapter 15, opens up. Let's look at verse 1. After this daring rescue, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, and I am your very great reward. Abraham undoubtedly had just risked his life, been in great danger to try to rescue these hostages from these invading armies. And God says, I want you to know, Abraham, I'm taking care of you. I am your shield. Abraham, you'll remember, had just turned down a large reward from the king of Sodom. And God says, I am your great reward. I am sufficient for you in your time of trouble. Verse 2. But Abram said, this becomes a conversation, you see, between Abraham and God. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said to God, God, you've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Now, to understand what Abraham is getting at here, we have to remind ourselves of something that God had promised him. Because what Abraham's doing, he's trying to make sense of something God had promised to him earlier. Remember when Abraham lived in Ur of the Chaldeans? God had appeared to him and had promised him several things. One of the things God promised this man was, I will make you into a great nation. God had promised him that years earlier. Now, for that promise to come true, obviously Abraham needed an heir. If Abraham did not have an heir, Abraham's family would have ended with Abraham. So, and in Genesis chapter 15, by the time we get to the Genesis chapter 15, Abraham's somewhere between 75 and 85 years old. So Abraham's trying to make sense of this promise. Perhaps, God, your plan for me is not to give me my own son. Maybe your plan for me is for my heir to be my servant, because that's culturally what would happen. If someone died without an heir, all of their possessions went to the head servant. And so Abraham's trying to make sense of this promise God had made him. He had faith. He knew what God was going to do. He was just trying to figure out how he was going to do it. Which brings me to a very important point. When it comes to this faith, that allows us to know God, to do life with our Creator. Faith does not lean on understanding. Abraham believed God even though he didn't understand how God was going to bring it about. Faith does not lean on our understanding. Now, I want to clarify something before I go on here, because sometimes there's confusion about this. This does not mean that the Christian faith is blind. Okay? Please don't ever think about the Christian faith as being a step off a cliff or a shot in the dark or a I hope this is true kind of religion. That is not what Christianity is all about. The Christian faith is based on solid evidence. God has revealed so much to us that affirms the Christian faith. We see God's majesty in creation. We see His sovereignty throughout history. We see His love for us in the way that He gave Jesus to die for us. We have confidence in what God did for us because of the veracity of Jesus' resurrection. The Christian faith is founded on hard, solid evidence. So I'm not suggesting when I say that faith doesn't lean on understanding, I'm not saying that our faith is baseless, no. But what I am saying is it doesn't depend on our understanding. Let me give you an example. Catherine and I were on a road trip recently, and we were cruising down the interstate at 70 miles an hour or thereabouts. We were going 70 miles an hour or thereabouts. And we were making great time. When all of a sudden, the little navigation app on our phone said, get off at the next exit. And I looked over at Catherine and I said, what? What's she saying? She says, I said, look at the app, see what's going on. So Catherine takes the app, you know how you can see the map forward? She said, yeah, this app's telling us to get off the interstate and go all these back roads for a little while and then get back on the interstate later. Now, I'm going to tell you, that made no sense to me. I was cruising 70 miles an hour. Why would I get off at an exit, go all these back roads with lower speed limits, all these traffic lights, all the traffic? Why would I do that? But you know what I did? I got off at the next exit. Now, why did I do something that did not make sense to me? Here's why. Because I know that app had information, had a view, had a perspective that I could not and did not have. That app knew what was going on up in front of me on the road that I could not yet see. So I got off at that exit. See, I've learned the hard way. I have learned the hard way. When the app says, get off at the next exit, when I say, look, forget that, I'm doing this my way, I have lived through that pain. I've learned that lesson the hard way. You see, our faith, it's based on evidence, but it doesn't always lean on our own understanding. Sometimes our faith is going to cause us to do things that simply doesn't make sense as we follow God in obedience. When God's ways take us in directions that make no sense to us, church, it is the height of arrogance for us to say, God, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to do this my way because I know more than you know. Look, this crowd right here, you're a smart crowd. But let me say something about every human being that ever lived. There is far more that you don't know than you do know. And when we trust God's ways, we are just simply acknowledging God knows it all. God knows far more about life than I know. That's why our faith does not lean on understanding. It's Proverbs chapter 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him and His ways. And when you do that, He'll make your path straight. God's ways are the best ways, even when you don't understand them at the time. Now, I want you to notice how God responds to Abraham's suggestion. God, look, you've promised me this, I got that, but I can't see how you're going to bring this about. So maybe you mean this. Here's God's response to Abraham. I love this. Verse 4. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man, Eliezer, will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. Now watch this, verse 5. God took Abram outside. God took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. So God essentially says, Abraham, wrong. That's not the way I'm going to do it. You're going to have a son of your own flesh and blood. You're going to have your own son. And just to make sure you understand this, God took Abraham outside. I love that. He took them out of what was familiar to him, took Abraham out of his world, out of his limited place where he lived, and he took them out into God's place. Sometimes I think we as Christians would do well to let God take us outside, get out of our own little world, and let us see the majesty of the Lord. God took him outside and he said, look up at the stars. And if you can count the stars, that's how many offspring you're going to have. Now, God could have illustrated that in any number of ways. In fact, a few chapters later, God tells Abraham, your offspring is going to number as many as the sands on the seashore. Y'all remember that? There are a million ways God could have said, this is how many people are going to be in your family. But he took him outside. Why did he do that? Not only was he trying to tell Abraham, your descendants are going to be countless, but I want to remind you of my ability to do what I've said I'm going to do. The heavens declare the glory of God. The heavens, if you ever get overwhelmed with life's problems and you want to encourage your soul, walk outside, look up into the night sky and say, the same God who hung every star in the sky is the same God who loves me, cares for me, and can meet my need. God was not only affirming to Abraham the size of his family, he was reminding him of his power to deliver. And then here's something else important to understand about this faith that we're talking about. Faith always points toward trust. The reason God took Abraham outside, reminded him how big God was that faith, the faith that we have, always points toward whatever we trust. Okay, I want to make another important statement here. Faith is not something only religious people have. I know faith is a church word. We use that word a lot in church. But faith is not something that only religious people have. Faith is something absolutely necessary to live life for everybody. You cannot live life apart from placing your faith in something. Faith is a compulsory part of life. It's not a crutch for religious people looking for answers, okay? When I fly on an airplane, there's much about the airplane that I do not understand. Now, to make no mistake, when I get on an airplane, I am trusting that airplane with my life. I mean, I am trusting that thing to keep me safe and sound 7 miles above the Atlantic Ocean, for example. I'm trusting my life, but there's a lot I don't understand about it. I don't understand how jet engines work. I don't understand how the Bernoulli principle, the thing that lifts airplanes off the ground and takes them to I can't get my head around how that works. I have no idea what the people in the cockpit are doing or how they're doing it. But you know what? You know why I get on an airplane? Not because I understand it, but because I trust it. So here's the question. The question is not, do you have faith? The question for every human being is this one. Is the object of my faith trustworthy? Is whatever it is that I have chosen to place my faith in, does it deserve my trust? Can it be trusted? Now see, this is where so much anxiety and stress comes from. One of the root causes of the worry that we see in culture is people place their faith in something. They trust for their security and their well-being and their provision. They place their faith in things that cannot be trusted. Some place their faith in a job. They look to that job for their security, for their provision. All of their faith is there. But in the back of their minds, they know jobs go away. Companies downsize. That job will not always be there. So we worry, we stress because we've placed our faith in something we know doesn't always last. Economies. Some people place their faith in the economy. And they know in the back of their mind, wait a minute, I know that economies crash because I've seen it before. So we stress, we worry. Some people place their faith in relationships. But they know that relationships end. In fact, humanly speaking, all relationships end. At least worldly relationships end. Because none of us live forever in this world. So we begin to stress, we begin to worry when we have placed our faith in something, when we trust our security and our provision to things that simply cannot be trusted. God, in this chapter, takes Abraham out and says, look, Abraham, this is how many descendants you're going to have. And as you're counting, be reminded of my power and my ability to do what I've said I'm going to do. And then one final thing, and this is perhaps one of the most notable sentences in the entire Old Testament because it foreshadows the gospel. It's found in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. When God explained to Abraham what he was going to do and reminded him of his power to do it, Abram believed the Lord. And he, God, credited it to him, Abram, as righteousness. Abraham believed God, and God credited his belief as righteousness. One of the pinnacles of the Old Testament right here. This sentence is repeated over and over and over again in the New Testament because it is at the center, at the foundation of the gospel. It shows people can know God by God's grace through faith. Abraham believed, he had faith, and God credited that faith as righteousness. His faith was not righteousness, but God credited it as righteousness. Which brings me to this very important final point. God credits righteousness in response to faith. Now, here's why that's so important. If we're going to do life with God, if we're going to have a relationship with God, every single person in the room, including me, has a gigantic problem to overcome. And here's the problem. God is righteous. Now, what does that mean? To say that God is righteous means that God in no way is contaminated by sin. It's kind of like a surgeon going into surgery. He is sterile. He is completely free of germs. He's sterile because he has not been contaminated by germs. If the surgeon comes into contact with something that has not been sterilized, he is no longer sterile because he has been contaminated by germs. It's the same way with God. God is righteous, which means God is not and cannot be contaminated by sin. Now, that's a big problem for us. Because if we're going to do life with God, we're sinful. Look, you're great people. I love the people of. Let me tell you something. I thank God every day that I get to pastor such a wonderful, wonderful church. But none of us are perfect. None of us are righteous enough for God. We can. So if we're going to do life with God, we got to overcome that problem. Now there are only two options. There are only two options to get from where we are to where a righteous God is. There are only two options. Here's option number one. Option number one is for you to be perfect. Morally, spiritually, ethically, you just ace life. You never do anything wrong, never have a bad thought. Good luck with that. That's option number one. You can try to be good enough to get to where God is. Listen, option one is out because nobody can achieve that level of righteousness. So here's the only other option. The only other option is for the God that we're trying to know, who is sovereign, who is all-powerful, and who has all authority. He is the ultimate judge. He has the final say, is for him to declare us to be righteous. Because what God says is. So if somehow the creator of the universe could declare us righteous, we could have a relationship with God. And the way that God declares us righteous is that he counts our faith as righteousness. Okay, I read an illustration that is not perfect, okay? But maybe it'll help. Let's suppose there is a teenager who wants to go out with his friends on Friday night. And the teenager goes to his dad and says, "Dad, my friends are going out Friday night. Can I go with them?" And his dad says, "You can go out with your friends under one condition. After school on Friday, when you come home from school, between the time you get home from school and the time you go out with your friends, you clean your room. If you clean your room, you can go out with your friends." Okay. Well, Friday rolls around. The dad gets home from work and realizes that his son has not yet gotten home from school. So he walks up to his son's room, and guess what? The room has not been cleaned. So here's what the dad does. He decides to clean the room himself. Straightens everything up, puts everything in its place, so the room is immaculately clean. Well, a few minutes before time for the son to leave to go out with his friends, his teenage son comes walking in the door. And immediately, the son feels the full weight of his offense. He says, "Dad, look, I'm sorry. I know I was supposed to come home. I know I was supposed to clean my room. I got tied up at school and I couldn't get here. I realize that I can't go out with friends. I accept that." Okay. Then let's suppose the father says, "Okay, son, here's the deal. You're right, you didn't clean your room, but I cleaned it. Your room is now clean. And I am going to count your apology and your sorrow as a clean room. You didn't clean your room, but I'm going to count your apology for a clean room. You can go out with your friends." Okay, that for sure is a gracious act from the Father. The Father gave the Son far better than the Son deserved. But he did so in response to something the Son did. It's not because the Son did it, he did it graciously. That's in a similar way what happens when we place our faith in God. God counts our faith as the righteousness we need to do life with a righteous God. It doesn't mean we're righteous any more than it means the son cleaned his room. But it does mean that God, the ultimate judge, declares us to be righteous because of our faith. Romans chapter 5 kind of sums all this up. Therefore, Paul says, since we have been justified, made righteous through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. So think about what that means. That means that anybody, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter how badly you've blown it, anybody can do life with God because it's not based on what you know or what you can do. It's based on the faith that you place in Jesus that allows you to do life with God. Placing faith in what Jesus did for you when he died on the cross to pay for your sin. Look, that's a penalty that you owed that penalty, and I owed my penalty. Jesus, who knew no sin, hung on a cross bearing my sin and yours, and he paid the price for that sin. He cleaned our room. And whoever places their faith in what Jesus did for us, God counts that faith as righteousness. Are you trying to do life your own way? Folks, the whole theme of this series is that there is a far better way to do life. Do life with the Creator. He really does know better. And you can do life with God by placing your faith in what Jesus did for you, because God counts that as the righteousness you need to know Him. I'm going to ask for everyone to bow your heads and close your eyes, and here's why. There might be some here this morning, and you're still trying to do life your way. You're trying to do life apart from God. And you would say this morning, you know what? I want to do life with God. I want to place my faith in what Jesus did for me so that I can have a relationship and fellowship with my Creator. If that's you, your prayer might sound something like this. Dear God, I admit I need your forgiveness. I'm sorry for my sin. I believe Jesus, your Son, came and did for me what I can't do. He paid for my sin in full. And then He rose from the dead. And right now I'm placing all my faith in what Jesus did for me to make me righteous in your sight. Receive me, God, into your family as I place my trust, my faith, my hope in what Jesus did for me. In His name I ask it. Amen. If everyone would look back this way. If you prayed along with me this morning, or if you would like to know more about what it means to place your faith in Jesus, we would like to offer you some free literature as you leave the auditorium. It's available for you at guest services, which is on your way out. Please go by and receive that from us, because it spends more time to explain what it means to place faith in Jesus. Now, if you're watching online and you prayed along with me this morning, we would love to provide you with this same information. You can just simply go to imadeadecision.com. That's imadeadecision.com, no spaces. Fill the little form out there, send it to us, and we'll put some information that we know will be helpful to you in the mail to your home this week. Thank you for watching this video on First Redeemer's YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it, click like below and leave us a comment. And if you'd like more content like this, click subscribe and turn on your notifications. Thanks again for watching.